This is the Digital Formula Podcast, a show about digital transformations, why they fail, and how you can apply the formula to ensure that your transformation program will create the expected results. By aligning your services to your strategy, architect solutions well, and deliver them in an agile fashion. Welcome to episode 5 of the Digital Formula Podcast. I'm your host, Roland Volt, and as always, I'm joined today by my co-host, Mike Eidengren. Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Hey, Roland, great. Good to see you again.
Yeah, this becomes a habit, which is great. And today we have a very special guest, Larry Marine, who's our resident user experience guru. And the episode today, we're going to talk about lean user experience. So welcome to the show, Larry. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to the show. Glad to be here.
Of course, anytime. So maybe before we get started, Larry, talk a little bit about your background. Why did we invite you?
Well, I bring a distinctly different perspective to this whole digital transformation milieu. I've been a user experience researcher for about 34 years now. So I'm pretty much a seasoned pro at this, and I learned this from the father of user experience, Dr. Don Norman. I've been doing a lot of freelance work over these 34 years, so I've got a lot of different experiences in the healthcare, e-commerce, enterprise, web apps, things like that, and I got a number of top successes. You'd probably even use some of my designs over the years. So,
well, I'm pretty sure you will point that out to me the next time when I look at a website and start cursing and say, no, this is how it's supposed to do. But I also heard you put your experience into an old dead tree format. Is that correct?
Yes, you can get a physical book by ordering it online. Title of the book is called Disruptive Research, and it basically describes all of the user-centered design methods that I've evolved over the years. So it's doing quite well. I've got 4 whole reviews now, and they're all 5-star.
Ooh! So your mother, your grandmother, and 2 uncles?
You know my family.
I'm just jealous. I have that idea of writing a book in my head for a couple of years now and haven't done nothing on this. So you're definitely a step ahead of me. But maybe before we get into the meat, talk a little bit about you as a person. You know, I know you have some interesting hobbies and bucket list items and other stuff going on.
I'm pretty well traveled. I had a job with the Navy that took me all over the Pacific region. Then I settled down, have a family. I have 2 wonderful teenage daughters that I never fail to embarrass. You know, that's the value of being a father. I used to be a competitive cyclist. I raced for a team in San Diego. I was a Cat 3, did quite well, had a lot of fun, made a lot of good friends. And so I watch the Tour de France every year because I know some of the people that are on the teams. Well, at least I used to. It's been a while. So, but now I live in Colorado Springs in the mountains, and when I ride, no matter what direction I go, it's up.
I don't believe that. They all come down.
Eventually.
Yes, eventually.
Yeah, so I start out by going up so I could coast home.
Yep. But maybe we get into the topic. So we typically like to start the shows talking about definitions, you know, and setting the stage. So can you enlighten us a little bit about what user experience design is and how it's different from user interface design? Or is it the same?
No, they are quite different. User interface design is actually a subset of user experience. User experience has a number of different parts to it. Now, I like to use a metaphor of building a house. So an architect figures out, you know, what type of building the customer needs, what rooms it has to have, what the organization of those rooms might be. Things like that. And then the interior designer comes in and puts in the visual aspects of the rooms. So UX is figuring out what the building should be, and UI is figuring out what the interior design should be.
Oh, so it's interesting. So it's not just a pretty website, it's how we actually use it. and to get our mission accomplished, right?
Right, right. And so user experience design takes into account human psychology and behaviors and tries to make the design work for the users by the way they think rather than forcing the users to adapt to the technology.
So that must help the end users actually accomplish their goal and get their better outcomes. How does it actually happen? How do people actually get to their outcomes?
Well, you actually, in your user research, you try to identify what is the desired outcome for the stakeholders, the business, and the users. And your research is trying to identify that part of the technology that can be adapted to both the business and the users. So you start with the desired outcomes, and then you identify all of the pain points and the hurdles that get in the way of the users achieving that outcome. So your research is really more about understanding the user's needs from their perspective. And then you start to create solutions later on that get over those hurdles, if you will, and satisfy the user needs. And at the same time, you're balancing the business needs. You know, what are the capabilities of the technology and how do you leverage those to help the user instead of forcing the user to learn to use different cumbersome technologies?
Yeah. And can you give us some examples of projects that you worked on that one might recognize?
Yeah, one of them is one of my favorites anyway, and it's a highlight of the book. It's called ProFlowers. It's a website for selling, it's an online florist. And so we did the user research, and what we found out was that instead of just looking at all of the competitor websites and then modeling the design after that, we learned that all the competitor websites were designed by florists. And what do florists do? They build bouquets. And they expected their users to build bouquets. But when a guy goes to buy flowers, he's not interested in the flowers. He doesn't know anything about the flowers. He might know roses, maybe baby tears and fern leaves, and that's about it. But what we found out by doing our observational research was that guys go into a flower shop, not because they want flowers, but because, well, most likely they screwed up and forgot something like an anniversary or a birthday. So their problem, their pain point is, I have to find the right bouquet of flowers to satisfy my wife and say, I'm sorry, I forgot our anniversary again. And so it's not about the flowers, it's about the occasion. And that completely changed the way that we approach the website design. So instead of just putting out a catalog of flowers and bouquets, we organized it by the occasion so that when you went to the birthday occasion or the graduation occasion, you knew that you were going to find just the right bouquet for that occasion. And that completely changed the florist industry. Now all online florists, 1-800-Flowers, FTD, things like that, they all follow that model. And they did that because the average website converts at around 2 or 3%. The ProFlowers website converted over 25% every month for 20 years.
Because it solved a problem, right? A very important problem.
And it solved it in the way that the users would think about the problem.
Yeah, that makes sense. But maybe besides the user interface design or the website design, what else should user experience design? What else is it affected with? Well, you start to find that there are things outside of the interface, if you will, that the users need to attend to. So one of the things that happened was when we identified the fact that ProFlowers, for instance, was addressing the problem of, here's an occasion, so it was organized around occasions. That meant that the outbound messaging, the marketing, had to change. Mm-hmm. And then it also meant that what we did after they bought the flowers, that had to change too. And so, for instance, one of the things you captured in the whole flow was you understood what the occasion was because they select the occasion, then the bouquet, and they write a little card out. Well, next year, 2 weeks ahead of that occasion, they get an email because they filled it out on that card to remind them, oh, don't forget your anniversary again. So there were business processes that were designed around the research that we identified
for the problems that the user has. They're forgetful. So the reminder service overcame that forgetfulness and actually increased the sales opportunities. The return customer numbers were like 75%, which is extremely high.
That is impressive, yeah.
So Larry, tell us why we should care about UX.
Why should we care? Well, user research redefines the problem your user is trying to solve and the task required to solve it. If you don't accurately define the problem, the best you can hope to do is solve the wrong problem very well. And a lot of times companies throw technology at a problem without understanding how the users might use it. And the technology or the features alone won't solve the problem. Users don't want features, they want a desired outcome. As the saying goes, people don't want a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole. So we focus on the hole, not on the drill. And so there's an example I like to use about task-oriented design that I think gets it across. And so user experience design relies on task analysis and task-oriented approaches. The example I like to give is you buy a car, a used car, and the guy said, I know it needs spark plugs, but I haven't had time to put them in. So they're on the seat, and you can do it yourself. And you think, oh, yeah, sure, can't be that hard to change spark plugs, though you've never done it and you don't have any tools. Well, your developer friend says he has a whole garage full of tools, and you're welcome to use it. So you open up his garage, and you see all these tool chests. Fortunately, all the drawers are labeled. Screwdrivers, wrenches, sockets, hammers, and all that. So you think, wow, that's great. It'll be easy to find the tools. And then you realize you don't know which tools you need. And then you remember that your designer friend said she had a garage full of tools. So you go over there and you open the garage door, wall-to-wall tool chests, and all those drawers are labeled too. But those drawers are labeled by the task, not the tool. Mm-hmm. Change tire, change oil, change spark plugs. You open this change spark plug drawer, instead of 200 sockets, there's one socket, one extender, one handle, and a rubber hose with a note on it said, use this to pull the spark plug out of the cylinder head after you loosen it. Who knew that you needed that rubber hose? She did, because she did the task analysis.
Yeah, and she didn't take off all the plastic covers and all that other stuff just to reach the spark plugs.
Right.
It's interesting what you mentioned, Larry. I want to go back to something you said. If you don't accurately define the problem, the best you can hope to do is solve the wrong problem very well. And a lot of folks, a lot of our listeners might have some experience with software engineering, either directly developing software or being on teams developing software or management or business analysts. And I remember that one of the best practices is spend a little bit of time really figuring out through requirements validation. Do we even have the right requirements before we go and build this expensive thing and put all these resources into it? Sounds similar to what you're talking about.
Yes, it is. So you want to, there's this whole movement to fail fast. Well, do you really want to fail at all? Right? So if you don't take the time to look at the user's perspective of the problem, you can end up building the wrong thing. And then no matter how fast you build it, it's still the wrong thing. So UX focuses on making sure that you build the right thing. And then agility allows you to build the right thing the right way. So you avoid, those failures, because those failures cost time and money. And sometimes if you don't think you have time to do it right the first time, what makes you think you'll have time to do it again?
That is a very fair point, and I don't want to go down that route, but that's how typically IT is built. You don't have an architect drawing a plan and whatever, do load calculations. No, you hop in your pickup truck, go to the home improvement store, buy 2x4s, a hammer, a nail, and start hammering, right? But
right.
That's way too much. But we're getting to the midpoint of the episode. But I do have a question before we get into a short break. And that is, so we're approaching roughly the halftime of the show. But before we get to this, and I know we want to talk a little bit deeper about a specific topic in the second segment. I know, Larry, that there are different tasks that you do in user experience design that will bring us to this. Can you give us a quick walkthrough of all those different activities that you do, and maybe a short explanation of why you should do them and why they're useful?
Sure. In Lean UX, they say you can identify the user as a persona. Well, we go a little bit deeper, and we do some observational research rather than just coming up with what we think the best definition of the user is. And we like to do user observations or user interviews to get their perspective on things. And so you find out that there's certain cognitive or behavioral traits that you need to know about in order to design an effective solution. And that after that, we do some task analysis, which is like a jobs to be done. And it's a breakdown of the specific steps. So we do that in several layers. The first is the big picture, which gives us a sense of what the domain looks like from the user's perspective. And then, we look at that and say, this is one of the areas of that whole domain that we want to dig deeper into. So you do a second pass, a task analysis. And then you use that information to create a more refined user persona, what we call a user hat, which is based on the knowledge that the users have to perform that particular task, and what knowledge are they going to need but won't have. That defines a knowledge gap, because you want to design to solve for that knowledge or bridge that knowledge gap. And then we do an optimized user task flow. And the point of that is to get a better idea of how will the future look for that user and what we need, what technologies we're going to need in order to create that optimized solution. So this gets away from that feature-oriented approach that a lot of teams look at. They go, well, we have this technology and it has all these features. Well, like I said, people don't want a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole. And sometimes throwing more features at it just, makes it more difficult for the user. So you identify what the optimum solution is, and then you start applying the technology to it in the form of a design. And then, of course, you do usability testing. Mm-hmm. That's a hallmark of user experience design.
Yeah, which I can imagine that would be an episode in itself, how to set up all that type of stuff. But to summarize, so if I understand you correctly, it's getting the big picture first, right? Do a first pass of the task analysis, and then do a second iteration, and you look for the details in there, and then you try to optimize it. That then goes into your application design or website design or whatever you have.
Right. And in that whole thing, you're also developing a better understanding, a better character assignment for the user. These are the traits this user has, both cognitive and behavioral.
Yeah, of course. Well, I guess some listeners' heads are already starting to release some smoke out of them. So we want to give them a little break. And we're going to see each other after this.
Do you have that feeling like something may not be right with your service delivery or how you're using your ServiceNow platform? LSA Digital is your partner in turning that around. We understand that every organization is unique, which is why we offer a free 30-minute consultation to identify the perfect fit assessment for you. Whether you're looking to refine your current practices or undertake a thorough transformation, our tailored assessments align with your goals to deliver actionable insights and measurable outcomes. Connect with us today. Let's unlock the full potential of your ServiceNow platform and service management practices. LSA Digital. We're not just consultants, we're your strategic allies for ServiceNow and service management optimization.
All right. Thanks for that enlightening session, Larry. In the first part, gave us a little bit of idea of what UX is and how it's different from UI. Can you tell us, in the context of a big digital program, how does it add value? How does UX add value to the program?
The big value is that it really does ensure that you're making the right thing, and it avoids failure. One of the biggest problems that people run into when they're going through a digital transformation effort is they end up looking at what they've got and somehow think that that's the right solution already. So they end up automating current frustrations. This helps avoid that failure. That way you don't end up tying yourself to a legacy system. You can move forward. You can start to look at what opportunities are ahead of you. You create a digital roadmap, if you will, to know where you want to be in the future, rather than just saying, I want to have something that's like what I have now, only faster. Well, if it's the wrong thing, it's still the wrong thing.
Yeah, that is true. But how do you define, well, who you are solving the problem for then? So what's your approach to answer that question?
Well, you have to identify who all of the different users are within a system, within a whole company, including the customer, the customer service people, anybody in the company, and look to see what their needs are. Is somebody going to need a performance dashboard? Is the customer going to need separate different tasks that they have to perform? And then you have to design for that. So by looking at the users and identifying what each different user's needs are, you get a better idea of what you have to solve for. And you can prioritize that. You can say, this is what we have to solve for now. This is what we have to plan for in the future. That prioritization is key.
Yeah, speaking of priorities, Larry, that's always important from an agility perspective, right? Is to try to get the most juice from the squeeze, right? To solve those important problems first. And I remember you and I were on a project recently where there is research done. The interesting thing is that there were site visits by a group of folks who went around to the other directorates and said, hey, what are the problems you guys are having? What are your pain points? And the interesting thing about that was that it was such a rich set of data that came back. And I think it was because the folks who were asking the questions were part of that tribe. They kind of understood and commiserated with the folks they were talking to. Do you have any other ideas or about how we can get really good pain points and understand who these people are and what their pain points are?
When you start to do the task analysis and you do it collaboratively with the users, they start to remember things and can add some richness to what you're talking about. And that's a way for somebody who may not be as familiar with the domain as the end users can become a little bit more knowledgeable about the domain. So good task analysis will help identify new questions to ask.
So now I'm thinking out loud, because that can take quite an effort. And I was just wondering, is there an overlap to business process design? And obviously there's also the question, well, how do you measure the value out of that exercise? Are there measurements, or is it just feel good gut feelings that you have solved things? Because obviously you gave us some impressive examples in the first segment.
Yeah, so there are quantifiable metrics, but those usually come out of usability testing, and that gives you, usability testing is testing not only the design to see if it is useful and usable, but also gauges how close to the right thing you are. Does it meet the user's needs? And that's quantifiable to some extent, but a lot of the metrics that we use are qualifiable because you're only observing 5 to 10 users of a certain user type. So you might altogether only be able to interview, 50 people, 60 people, and that's not enough data to give you statistically significant quantifiable data. But it does give you a better sense about what the problems are, and then you can start to gauge how close you are getting to solving those problems. And you can even go back to the users with some early prototypes of a design to identify how well you're solving that problem for them. Because if they look at it and say, no, that's not solving the problem, then you haven't done a very good job. But if they look at it and say, oh, wow, that's going to save me an hour a day or 2 hours a day, you're on the right track. So there is a lot of qualified data that you can use, but it's not statistically significant.
Yeah, and coming back to the first part of my question, what is your experience on working with process designers and people who are responsible for the hard things?
Yeah, I like working with the business process modelers or the enterprise architects who are working to take that information that we uncover in our user observations and turning that into a more optimized solution. So, we collaborate with the business process folks and with the business leaders. There are times when you can identify something they never even thought of as a solution approach because they'd never thought of the problem in the way that we uncover in our observations. So collaborating with the business owners, with the process modelers, really helps to fine tune what the solution should look like.
Yeah, that's interesting, Larry. And I know that as we look at the solution and we look at the entire solution, it's not just the process, but it's the technology and how the people use it. And it's really interesting that we've already kind of collected a lot of good information through the research you mentioned about the hats people wear, the roles they play. And I think that can really help accelerate and provide some better basis for our process modeling with real data.
Yeah, I think so too. It's worked out that way. Once you have a better idea of who each of the users are when they're doing a particular task, what do they know about that task, what do they need to know, then you can more optimize the task flow. And using the technology, you can start to leverage the capabilities of the technology in new ways. And sometimes you can even identify technologies that you never knew you needed and identify technologies that you've had but didn't really use anyway. So, it's a good way to get a better handle on what it is you actually need and how to use it to solve the user's problems.
That's interesting, Larry, because sometimes we talk about secure UX, and security is a big deal in IT, right? We got to make sure that people trust the systems they're using and that they're secure. And if we aren't even using features that expose some user data, well, then why even continue to take that risk of exposing the data? Why don't we just turn the features off? So I think that sounds like we'd get one benefit there, right?
That's a great observation. Yes. It's funny, 10 years ago, people looked at security as a hurdle. It got in their way and all that. But with the proliferation of hacking and identity theft and all of that, people expect a certain level of security now. And if it's not there, then they become worried. So there is this balance between security and user experience. And there's a lot of solutions like single sign-on is good and two-factor authentication. So there are a number of solutions already out there. And one of the things that you want to avoid is if people are familiar with a certain solution, why not leverage it and apply it to you? You don't have to reinvent the wheel and create a whole new solution that might not be as usable as some of the ones people are already familiar with.
And you also opened the door a little bit with your example to a topic that I discussed with a friend on my other podcast, shameless plug, about data modeling, where you have to understand is what you're actually looking for and why do you ask people for that information and how do you use it? Not only how do you store it physically, but also what is the sequence flow of your screens? Does it make sense? What happens if somebody puts some things in their shopping carts? Do we force them to check out or do we want them to go back to shop more? Right, which I think is the most likely answer to that question. But hey, time flies while we have fun. So we got basically time for one more question, Larry. And what I found very interesting is, and you convinced me during this show that it's very important to have a look at the personas and what their needs are and what they're supposed to do. But the question that I have is, well, how do you set up the research? Is that a big effort that you have to do where it costs me an arm and a leg and I have to invite 500 people to do it? Or is that a small thing that I just ask my grandmother about how to buy some flowers on a website?
If it was only that easy.
Yeah.
No, you have to make sure that eventually you have very representative users to talk with. So when you start off with your initial observations, your first pass of the task analysis to get the big picture, you may not know who the users are. You're just going out getting a start, getting an idea of what the domain looks like. And that'll help you start to identify some of the users. And you may be surprised at who the users really are. There are cases where you might think that a CTO is your end user for a particular product that you have. come to find out, it's a lower level person being tasked by the manager who works for the CTO to find information and come up with options. And so, you find that out on your first pass. And so your second pass, you might go back out and look at those particular people with a little bit more depth and a keener eye. So you start off just doing some initial user research and know that you're going to have to do more. Sometimes you can't do the observations. Sometimes you have to rely on interviews. And those are actually more difficult than the observations. The problem with interviews is a lot of times people won't tell you certain things. For instance, there might be a problem in a task that they're doing, but they have a workaround for it. So in their mind, they've solved that problem. But the fact that there has to be a workaround there means there's an opportunity to optimize that task and eliminate that problem altogether. So if you have a chance, do observations, otherwise do interviews, but be keen to think about questions that you can ask that might expose workarounds or other ways that they have for trying to get around a problem.
That's really interesting, Larry. Sometimes to kind of build on your example there, I've advised IT folk, the business folks within IT, they've been so used to getting not as good service as they expect from IT that they would have so many workarounds that they forgot what a good solution looks like. So sometimes you have to remind them, hey, there's a better way, guys. You should demand more from your IT, from your systems.
Well, a lot of times systems are evolved over time. They start off with a legacy system and they put a Band-Aid on it, then another Band-Aid and another Band-Aid. And they forget that, hey, this is your opportunity to get rid of all of those Band-Aids because the legacy system wasn't the right system for you. Now you have an opportunity to identify the right solution and build it correctly.
Yeah, but that's also the other point where the internal employee is not as much worth as the paying customer, right? So you intentionally provide a lesser service or lesser GUIs or whatever to your own colleagues, which is a shame in my mind.
Well, there is some truth in that. You don't necessarily have to put the same level of rigor into an internal system, but at the same time, you still want to put enough rigor in there that you identify problems and hurdles that get in the way. And you want to streamline not the customer journey so much, but the employee journey. Mm-hmm. How can you make it easier for them to do the right thing on a regular basis?
So you're telling me that employees are also people?
Perish the thought.
Yeah. Yeah. So Larry, we hear about user experience and customer experience, but a lot of the tips you gave us pretty much are applicable to both, right?
Oh, yes, definitely. Okay. When you think about it, your employees are, in a sense, a customer. You're trying to get them to do something for you, to get a job done.
Yeah, agreed. And with that solid statement, Larry, we're coming to the end of this episode. But before we all go from here, obviously, there's the question that's on everybody's mind, Actually, it's two questions. One is, how can I reach out to that Larry guy? Because I like what I heard, and I want to have a deeper conversation with him because I have a problem that I see.
He hides over in lsadigital.com. Reach out to me at larry.marine@lsadigital.com. Mm-hmm. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
And I'm pretty sure you also have a LinkedIn profile that you check once in a while that we will also add to the show notes there. But the other thing is just to come back to the introduction. Where can, if somebody is shy and doesn't want to reach out to you immediately, where can they find your book, Disruptive Research?
It is on Amazon, and just type in Disruptive Research and you'll see it. It looks like it has a bunch of stickies on it, and that represents task analysis.
All right, perfect. And with that, I think we're at the end of our show for today. Larry, thank you very, very much for being our guest. And Mike, as always, a pleasure to having you on the show as well. And dear listeners, thanks for listening in. If you liked what you heard, please don't be shy. Tell your five best friends about our show. We would love to have you on board. And with that, I wish you a happy day, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again in the next episode.